Okay, well, I am Robert Montgomery. I am with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We take security pretty serious enough to where it's twice in our name. It is kind of a mouthful. I'm the Cybersecurity State Coordinator for Utah, which is part of Region 8. I'll kind of get into the regions and stuff here in a little bit. A little bit about me. I grew up in Southeast Idaho. My first job was working on a farm. I was moving hand lines, irrigation pipe in high school. Worked my way up to moving wheel lines. That was quite a good break from the hand lines. And then moved up to actually disking fields on the tractor and harvesting wheat with a combine. But that's about as far as my agricultural experience goes. I do remember the farm that I did work for, the family that ran the farm. Whenever it came time to harvest, like just before the harvest, stress levels were really high. Potato prices were on everybody's minds, and it was just I could tell just how stressful it was when it came time, for the harvest. And so this was back in 1993. So it's been quite a few years since I used to work on that farm, and a lot's changed, right? Technology has really been integrated a lot more within our agricultural sector, and with that additional technology, alleviate some of that stress and build some of the resilience. I can also share those in the chat if you'd like. So a little bit about CISA. If you're not sure about what our work is, really we work to really improve the resiliency, the cyber security posture of all the critical infrastructure within the entire nation. So when I say critical infrastructure, oh, sorry, move on to this one. Sorry. When I say critical infrastructure, it's all the different 16 sectors of critical infrastructure that we work with. So I'm not a subject matter expert in all 16 of those sectors, but what I am a subject matter expert in is cyber. So I try to do my best to kind of talk and learn about each one of the sectors and really try to help apply that cybersecurity thought process within all of these different organizations and enterprises. So as you can see, one of those 16 critical infrastructures is food and agriculture. While this applies obviously to the majority of the people on this call, there's also additional external dependencies that we do rely on, right? So we're relying on water, we rely on energy, we rely on transportation for all of our logistical needs. And so when we think about our external dependencies, we also need to kind of consider about how are they being resilient and how are they protected in order to make sure that my industry is protected as well. Let's see, one thing I really want to put out also is that CISA is non-regulatory. As you can see, where CISA does apply to some of these critical infrastructures, a lot of the other ones have regulatory compliance agencies that are that have like oversight. So like the USDA, EPA, the Department of Energy, stuff like that. We don't provide any like regulatory compliance or anything like that. We are strictly here to help. Now we partnership with USDA, we partnership with the EPA to help come up with assessments that are more in line with your industry, but we don't have any kind of regulatory requirement. So that really kind of puts us in a neutral position. It allows the stakeholders to kind of provide more information to us without fear of any kind of regulatory or any kind of punishment, so to speak. So I talked about Region 8, I'm part of Region 8, so we are broken up in the same regions as FEMA. So Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, we're all part of Region 8. I do work and communicate with a lot of the other state coordinators within other states. I'm assigned to Utah, but we have a CSC that's assigned to Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota. So if you would like their information, I can always provide you with that information, do an introduction with you. In fact, Nevada just got a new CSC just a few weeks ago. And so if there is anybody here from Nevada that would like to have me introduce them to their new CSC, I'd be more than happy to help out with that. Okay, So cyber threats to food and agriculture. It's really a lot of the same stuff that's affecting all of our other critical infrastructure. So we have to worry about ransomware. We have to worry about supply chain disruption. In fact, probably supply chain disruptions are more impactful for food and agriculture than they are other infrastructure. There's data breaches and operational technology disruptions. So as the technology has gotten more in depth with our business with this infrastructure, that we rely more on automation, and it becomes a greater risk when that is disrupted. It becomes actually a safety factor at that point. So if we think about our industrial control systems, any kind of monitoring or sensors, stuff like that. And then there's also false data injections. And this is basically just where if you're relying on information from external resources, external websites, having false data brought to you could make decision making a lot more difficult, or you could make the wrong decisions based on this false data injections. So hackers will falsify data and tamper with the decisions and the results that will affect you. And I'll get a little bit more in depth on like ransomware and supply chain disruptions too. Okay, so a little bit about recent ransomware attacks. I just kind of pulled this from this Comparatech website. It's just what I've seen in the last couple of years. And I really tried to pick out some of the stuff that was a little bit more related to small farm and the smaller industries. As you can see, I think we have 8 here just in the last couple of years. And I'm not going to get in depth with the type of attack, but they are ransomware attacks. Some of them paid the ransom, some of them did not pay the ransom. But no matter how large or small you are, you're at risk of a ransomware attack. And so that's the thing that I really want to kind of drive home, is that a lot of these different industries think, well, we're small, we're rural, and it's not really going to, we're not really a high target. But what you provide is important. And if what you do is valuable to you, then it's valuable to somebody else. And so they will take your, basically, if they ransomware you and you're, if you're panicking and you're worried, then they can capitalize on that and get payments. And so that's what they're kind of hoping for. A little bit closer to home, just recently, and I really want to pay attention to this date here, January 30th, 2025. This was less than a month ago. We had a report of a ransomware here local to Utah. I'm not going to give out any names or anything like that. It was a small operation. It was a small farm. 2 servers and 5 workstations were affected by it, so really not a ton, but it did affect their accounting files. It affected their HR database, and they had to shut down all their systems. And luckily, thank goodness for them, great job for this small farm. They had backups of their systems and they were able to restore them. So they didn't pay the ransom. And that's one thing that CISA usually does recommend, is not paying the ransom, but ultimately it's up to you, your decision if you're going to pay that ransom. If you have no other means, sometimes paying the ransom is the only option that you have. On the aftermath on that, they're continuing on an investigation on the stolen personal information. This is one thing that I like to talk about too, because while they were able to restore their systems from the ransomware attack, there's always going to be like tertiary issues that can come with that. So what we call like double extortion and triple extortion, if they've exfiltrated the data off of your network, and so the ransomware attackers have your data, they can then use that to extort you out of more money. They can say, well, we're going to release this data, we're going to release this personal information to the public unless you pay the ransom. If that doesn't work, then sometimes they will go to your customers and they will reach out to them and say, hey, we have your personal information. It came from this organization, this company. They're refusing to pay the ransom. And then they try to get your customers to start, leaning into you and demanding that a ransom is paid. Ransomware is actually a business model now. It is so lucrative that they've actually developed tiered systems of support for ransomware. So if an organization gets ransomed, usually you have your first tier that reaches out and explains how to set up a Bitcoin wallet or set up a payment method. And then it moves you on to the next tier, and then they help you get your files back or get your systems unencrypted. And so it's really a full-on business model nowadays. So it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. They have the people that are developing the ransomware are not the same people that are actually infecting the systems. So it's pretty crazy to think. All right, so some of our best practices that we like to emphasize are strong passwords. Longer passwords are stronger. I have a chart that kind of shows exactly how important it is to have longer passwords over just having complicated passwords. Running multi-factor authentication, that's where you use, like an SMS message to verify that you are who you are when you log in. So we always recommend people using multi-factor authentication. Sign up for it with whatever application you're running, so that way you get those text messages with that PIN number or that code in order to verify that it's you. That's going to really help with, for one, it helps eliminate them from guessing your password and logging into your systems. And two, if somebody is able to guess your password, you already get an alert on your phone that someone's trying to do it. So it kind of gives you a heads up. So definitely recommend multi-factor authentication. Installing software updates. Really, if all the software that you're running, try to keep it up to date, right? Set auto updates for your operating systems, stuff like that. Out-of-date software is really where a lot of these threat actors hunt. So if a patch comes out for a VPN device or a firewall, it's kind of a race where they will try and find a system that hasn't been patched to exploit it before you get an opportunity to actually patch it. So the quicker you patch it, the more protected you are from somebody trying to find that exploit. Recognizing and reporting phishing and smishing. So everybody's really familiar with phishing by now. Those are those emails that come in with, links to external sites. We identify them with like bad grammar or whatnot, but they're getting a lot better. With AI, the text in them is better. The grammar is a lot better. They're able to convince people a lot easier, and it works really. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it anymore. It's probably one of the most lucrative attack vectors that's out there right now. Just because us as humans, we're fallible, right? So I've even been pretty close to clicking on a link within a phishing email before, just because it was early in the morning. I was in a hurry to get to one of my appointments. I saw this email come in and it was about my computer, and I was like, oh man, really, this is happening right now? I got to update my computer, and I almost clicked on it and I realized it was a phishing scam. So if you do click on an email, or if you do click on a phishing link, it's best to, if you have upper management, report it, let somebody know, and act on it. Like I say, it can happen to anybody. If you're not familiar with smishing, that's where they do SMS text messages. A lot of the times it's just some social engineering where they're going to send you a text message that says, hey, right? And so all they're looking is for like somebody on the other end. So if you respond to those text messages, then even if it doesn't go beyond that, they know that that's a live person on the other end of that phone, and then they can sell that phone number to other attackers to use that for their smishing campaigns. And so you'll start getting more SMS text messages. You'll get links in them and stuff like that. There's a lot more ishing type things, like there's the quishing, which is QR codes. There's even calendar invite phishing now. So we've seen where people will send out calendar invites with links on them or attachments that have malware in them. And so a lot of the times we're not thinking about phishing when we're looking at our calendar. And we might just see some random event on our calendar, because the calendars it'll put an event on a calendar even if we don't accept it. And then we might be like, well, what's that? I don't remember this, but it sounds important. So what are we going to do? We want to try and find more information on it. So we'll click on the link, or we'll open up the attachment, and then that's how they get you. Avoiding products made in China. Really, China is really one of our biggest adversaries right now. And especially when it comes to industrial control systems, they have Bolt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon. If you haven't heard of that, they're basically threat actors that are using the what they call that living off the land. And so they're basically using your own industrial control systems against you. And so they're not introducing new software to your network. So it's really hard to detect them, and they're really laying dormant. And so a lot of the times they get into a industrial control system, and then they just use whatever software is available to them to pivot and position themselves into the network. And then they will take an opportune time to either release a ransomware, or they will take time to capitalize on an emergency that's already happening. So take water, wastewater for an example. If a water company has large industrial control systems that they're able to get into, they'll lay dormant. And then if something happens within that city where an emergency happens, then they can activate their attack and make it to where water is also not available. And so it's kind of a force multiplier for them. I'm going to talk a little bit more about China here in a second. Don't accept default installation options. So a lot of the times we're getting software, we're getting products, and we can just plug them in and they play and everything works great. But really, most products that you purchase need to have some type of management done to them. They need some type of a configuration, whether it's a router or it's a switch or a camera. You need to go in there, change default passwords, set up certain types of IP addresses and stuff like that. Basically, just kind of configure it to where it's protected. CISA is really pushing for software companies and hardware companies to develop their stuff with security baked into them. So instead of having a camera or a device that comes open and you have to lock it down, it comes pre-locked down and then you have to actually open it up. So it's called our Secure by Design initiative. Always segregate your IoT devices from enterprise networks. So you have your typical working network that has your HR documents on it, or maybe some file shares. But if you also have industrial control systems or cameras or sensors, you want to keep that separate from your typical regular working IT network. And then, of course, you want to mention that Secure by Design. We do have a pledge system. So we actually have a database of manufacturers and companies that have pledged to make their software secure by design. And you can go to our website and see who's made that pledge and know that they're developing software that's already locked down, that you don't have to try to lock down yourself as much. As I talked about the passwords and how the time is to crack and length is really important versus complexity. So if I have a password that's only 8 characters long and it has numbers, symbols, uppercase, lowercase, it can still be cracked within 3 hours. But if I have a password that's 16 characters long, and that's usually what I recommend, is about a 16 character password. Even if I only have a password that's nothing but lowercase, it takes about 2,136 years to crack. So I'll probably change my password within that time frame. So hopefully by the time that it gets cracked, I'll have already changed it. So length, by this chart, you can tell is a lot more important than having the complexity of uppercase, lowercase numbers, and symbols. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't use them. It's just by having the length and the complexity together, they work best, right? Okay, so supply chain threats. So for IT supply chain, we have our IoT devices. Again, that's your cameras. That's going to be your sensors, stuff like that. Kind of fits into that industrial control system category. We have irrigation systems, UAS, or unmanned flying systems. We have positioning, navigation, and timing devices that can be on our network, RFID systems. Really, there's all these different types of technology that we're integrating with our agriculture now. And each one of these provides some type of risk. So the People's Republic of China has a new UAS threat. So that's the drones that are out there. If you are purchasing drones, I would highly recommend purchasing from manufacturers that are both TA compliant and NFAA compliant. So that's basically the Trade Act agreement, where you're purchasing items from companies that are allies of the US. So that's Taiwan, Mexico, and the US. China just recently passed a law to allow their devices that communicate and collect data, that the Chinese government has access to that data. And so it was just released on January, or not just released, but on January 17th, 2024, CISA released guidance on Chinese manufacturers of UAS systems. And it really kind of breaks down how China has expanded their ability to access the data that those systems collect. Let's see. Yeah. So some of the threats that can provide is data theft, right? So they can get information based off of the location of where the UAS is. They can get any kind of intellectual property. The data from those UAS systems is usually connected to the network, and so they can use that as an entry point into your network. All right, so I have kind of talked a lot about how we've integrated a lot more technology within the agricultural sector. This is just kind of an example of some of the areas where we may see it. In the farm office, you may have connection to market information, file transfers, cloud-based systems. You may have sensors that are out in the field to measure moisture, weather, soil properties, stuff like that. All of this becomes a target for hackers. So more supply chain resilience management information is available on our website. We have these QR codes that can provide that for you. The small business and medium-sized business is not necessarily agriculture, but since most of you fall on that category of small and medium-sized business, this handbook is exceptionally useful. Let's see. Whoops, sorry. So what can CISA actually do to help with some of this? So we have a wide range of cybersecurity assessments that we can provide. And that's really the core of what my job is here in Utah. I travel around the state. I meet with all the different 16 areas of critical infrastructure, and I provide cybersecurity assessments for them. We also provide vulnerability scanning. So if you have any devices on your network that are public facing, whether it's a website, a VPN, or even just a firewall or a gateway, we can do vulnerability scanning on that and provide you with weekly reports on the results of that. We provide pen testing and network architecture validation. So if you have a large industrial control system, a lot of the times we'll have, vendors may come in and set up that industrial control system, your SCADA systems. We can come in and make sure that the network architecture on that is designed properly. They'll do network traffic analysis and data flows and make sure that everything's working properly on there, or that your resilience is baked into it. We provide tabletop exercises, both live and remote. Our teams will come out, sit with you, and do an actual tabletop exercise and go through an actual scenario of an attack, both physical or cyber, and help you with developing a incident response plan in order to protect against those type of attacks. We have cybersecurity training, both live and remote. It's online training. It's still kind of in the process of being developed, but if you really want to just kind of get started with cybersecurity, or if you have an IT professional that works for your organization, you can get them some free training. And then we also provide intel, threat intel and vulnerabilities with what's called our KEV catalog, which is basically vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited out in the wild. So when I talk about our cybersecurity assessments, we have quite a wide range of them. All of them are based off of the NIST cybersecurity framework. Just starting out with like small organizations, or if you don't have a real cybersecurity program, I highly recommend like a cross-sector cyber performance goals. This both evaluates your IT and your OT environment. And it's about 38 questions. It's 1 hour. It's kind of really a good starting point to get you into those best business practices, changing default passwords, segmenting out specific areas of your network, kind of just developing a basic cybersecurity program. As your cybersecurity program grows, we have much more in-depth cyber assessments. Some of them are 2 hours, and then our largest one is 6 hours. We also have one if you depend on a lot of external dependencies out there, water, power, internet service providers, that type of stuff, managed service providers, cloud service providers. We have an external dependencies assessment that can help you with developing contract information that should be baking in resiliency to those external dependencies. If you don't want an advisor to come out and do an assessment, you can do all the assessments that I mentioned before on your own with the CSET tool. So this is basically a tool that allows you to run your own assessment without an advisor there. I actually use the same tool for when I'm doing the assessments with a stakeholder. One thing I do try to recommend is having an advisor with you when you're doing one of these assessments, because we can help kind of interpret the questions as they're being asked, and then also give you real world examples of how implementing some of these controls would look. So I spent 27 years in the National Guard, working in the DoD, and everything is extremely secure there. We've implemented many security programs there, and I've seen a lot of the pitfalls and had a lot of lessons learned on implementing like encryption on hard drives, and setting up eliminating thumb drives from the network, and setting up multi-factor authentication, all that kind of stuff. So an advisor can really help with providing guidance on how some of these controls are implemented. I'm going to talk about the vulnerability scanning. Again, this is those systems that you might have public facing. So our vulnerability scanning, they will scan any public facing IP address that you provide and give you a weekly report of what vulnerabilities are out there. So the threat actors are scanning the networks constantly. They're constantly scanning all the different IP addresses out there. So your systems, if they're public facing, are getting scanned. So this provides you an idea of what they're seeing when they're scanning your systems. If you have a public-facing website, we do web application scanning that will provide you a monthly report of all the vulnerabilities on your website. So very useful. We have quite a few people sign up for that. I would say at the minimum, if you have anything public-facing, I would sign up for this vulnerability scanning because it's extremely valuable. And of course, when I say valuable, everything that we offer is free. So all of our services are at no cost. For larger networks and for more mature cybersecurity programs, we also offer remote pen testing. A lot of the times I like to come in and do an evaluation or an assessment prior to a remote pen test, just to make sure that you're ready. A lot of organizations want to have a remote pen test done, but they're not quite ready, and it really wouldn't provide much value to them. If you have a large industrial control system, if you're running a lot of ICS and SCADA systems, we run a validation architecture designer review, which allows them to kind of check out your industrial control system. I'd mentioned it before, and how well the architecture is built and how resilient you are. Okay, tabletop exercises. So the two different types we have the in-person ones and virtual that we can conduct ourselves. It's about a 3-month planning process. We talk about what are the things that keep you up at night, your biggest fears as far as cyber or even physical security threats. And then we develop a scenario based on that, and then we run your organization through it. It allows you to test out your incident response plans, or even develop an incident response plan if you don't have one already available. We have CTEP exercises, which are on our website, and this QR code provides a link to that. These CTEP exercises are kind of like prepackaged tabletop scenarios that you can run through with your organizations that are based off of like predetermined scenarios. So whether it's supply chain, natural disaster, any type of scenario like that, there's over 100 different scenarios that you can choose from. So very valuable, just for like a quick, hey, let's try and see how we would act if a specific incident were to happen. We also have our learning portal. Again, it's still being kind of developed, but this is the link to that. Very useful training, whether you're new to cyber or if you're a seasoned vet. And then we also have industrial control systems. We partnership with Idaho National Labs to provide training for industrial control systems. We can actually get them to come out here on site. So extremely valuable for training on that. And if you haven't heard about our information sharing and analysis centers, the Food and AG ISAC is extremely useful. They just released a 2024 report for ransomware attacks in the food and ag industry. It's definitely worth a read. I'll put a link in that in the chat. So sign up for the Food and Ag ISAC. It's extremely valuable information. And then we also have a local ISAC here in Utah. which is our state fusion center. Signing up with them at their intelligence portal can provide regular updates on threats that are specific to Utah or to your industry. And then along with our cyber advisors, we also have physical security advisors. I go out and do cybersecurity assessments, but our Utah PSAs do physical security assessments. They'll look at your your buildings. They'll check where you may have cameras or suggest where you may want to put cameras and provide you with a really good physical security assessment. And of course, we want you to report. I know I kind of ran through a lot of these quick, just time is running out, so I want to make sure I hit this. Reporting is extremely useful. If we can get reports of cyber attacks or any kind of ransomware, we can share that with other people within your industry and help build resilience that way so they can be aware of it and they don't fall victim to it as well. So extremely useful. Visit us at CISA.gov and you can always reach out to me. I'll have my contact information. I think that's it. Any questions?
Sorry, I had a hard time unmuting myself. So the one question, I think you've answered it, but I think it really lends itself to being answered again is, what is the cost for these services?
Yeah, it's all free. Everything that we do here at CISA is free. Even the vulnerability scanning, it's all at no cost.
I thought this was really interesting, and it's obviously something that's on everybody's mind. You shared a lot of different resources and places, and sometimes I get kind of lost in kind of the crowd of the acronyms and everything else. If I want to kind of, if I'm a business owner and I'm pulled in a lot of different directions and stuff, what is kind of the one or two things that you would say, just sign up for or stay, kind of abreast of, or where would you start?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And that's the thing is, yeah, we're federal government, so we love acronyms, and it can be I still get overwhelmed by them. But I would say, again, if you have anything public facing, if you have anything that has a static IP or that's public facing, like a website or a VPN or a router, sign up for a vulnerability scanning. And then secondary.
And how do you sign up for that vulnerability scanning?
You just reach out to me. You can either do it through CISA.gov or reach out to me. Really, the main thing I would recommend doing is reaching out to your local cybersecurity coordinator, myself, and us advisors can get all this additional information to you. I know time is kind of short, so I'm trying to pack a lot into a small amount of time.
You're good, because I'm the next speaker, so I'm going to give you a couple more minutes.
We can sit down and kind of go over a lot of these resources and kind of talk about them out, find out what's best for you. But really, I'll say this, one of the questions that people ask me, and this is from any sector, I'm a small business or I'm a small company, small agency, I don't have a lot of resources, I don't have a big budget. Where do I start? What's my number one thing that I should be focusing on? And what I tell them is we have our CPGs and it gets you introduced into a cybersecurity framework, which is
what was the CPG? Tell me what that is again.
CPG is the kind of like a best practices. It's our CPG, their cyber performance goals, and it's based off the NIST cybersecurity framework. So it introduces you to the framework and it gets you started with things like, changing default passwords, separating out items on your network. It kind of gets you that cybersecurity mindset and setting up multi-factor authentication, those type of things. So that's usually what I recommend.
Other question, and you kind of just have answered it, but sometimes we're working with people that are just starting out their businesses, you know what I mean? Or how early, I guess, should they start to consider the cybersecurity?
I would say as soon as you start implementing any type of server or services that you're running off of a server, or if you're running any kind of an industrial control system, if you're automating anything, or if you have employees where you have personal information, anything like that, where you have stuff that can be really valuable for an attacker, I would definitely start there. I mean, really, it should be, I look at cyber as safety, the same as safety. So we all know about safety. We all know about wearing hard hats. We know about, having what are those, like your MSDS sheets for chemicals that you have in your area and that kind of stuff. We all have been around safety enough to know what we should and shouldn't be doing with hearing protection and eye protection. And cyber's kind of the same way. It has to be something that you kind of have to adopt culturally and live in any type of organization.